Observer Keth 9 stood in the transport bay of the research vessel Eternal Dawn, watching the stars shift through the viewport. His reflection stared back at him, tall, pale, with the silver markings along his temples that showed his rank in the Galactic Intelligence Bureau. Today would begin what his supervisors called a routine assignment. He did not expect it to change his life. The transport shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the clear metal windows, Keth 9 could see their destination. Observation. Post Sigma 7. The station looked like a small moon, its surface covered in sensor arrays and communication dishes. It was completely invisible to the primitive scanning technology of the species they would be watching. First time observing a new species, Observer Keth 9? Asked the transport pilot, a friendly Velkin named Captain Riso. No, Captain. I have observed 17 different species over the past 40 years. This assignment should be no different from the others. Captain Riso smiled. These humans are supposed to be quite interesting. My cousin works in the Initial Contact Division. He says they have some unusual behaviors. Keth 9 nodded politely but felt no particular curiosity. In his experience, all newly discovered species seemed unusual until you understood their basic nature. Most followed predictable patterns. They fought over resources, expanded their territory when they could, and generally acted according to simple survival instincts. The transport docked with observation post Sigma 7 20 minutes later. Keth 9 gathered his personal belongings and walked through the airlock into the station. The first person to greet him was Dr. Yuna Kim, the xenobiologist assigned to his team. Welcome to Sigma 7, Observer Keth 9, she said, bowing slightly in the traditional Velkin greeting. I hope your journey was comfortable. Dr. Kim was younger than Keth 9 expected, probably only 15 years out of the academy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes showed the bright curiosity that marked most scientists. She wore the blue uniform of the research division. Thank you, Doctor. I am eager to begin our work. What have you learned about these humans so far? They are quite fascinating, Dr. Kim replied as she led him through the station corridors. They have only achieved faster-than-light travel in the past 50 years, yet they have already established colonies on 12 different worlds. Their expansion rate is much faster than we predicted. They walked past laboratories filled with monitoring equipment. Through the windows, Keth 9 could see dozens of screens showing various human settlements and ships. Everything looked very ordinary. Their technology level? Keth 9 asked. Primitive by our standards, but advancing quickly. They seem to learn and adapt faster than most species at their development stage. However, they still wage war in very traditional ways. They reached a conference room where two other team members waited. Commander Jiwon Lee stood at attention when they entered. She was obviously military, with the straight posture and alert eyes that marked career soldiers. Her uniform was the dark green of the Strategic Analysis Corps. Observer Keth 9, Commander, Lee said formally. I am honored to work with someone of your experience. The honor is mine, Commander. What is your assessment of human military capabilities? Surprisingly limited, Commander Lee replied. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles and simple energy systems. Their ships are slow and poorly armored. Their tactics are straightforward and predictable. Honestly, I am not sure why the Bureau considers them worth studying. The third team member was Technician Minho Park, a communications specialist. He was quiet and serious, with the careful manner of someone who spent most of his time listening to other people's conversations. Technician Park has been monitoring human communications for the past month, Dr. Kim explained. What have you learned about their language and culture? They use over 6,000 different languages, Technician Park said in his soft voice. However, they have developed several common languages for trade and military purposes. Their communications are not encrypted in any meaningful way. We can understand almost everything they say. What do they talk about? Keth 9 asked. The usual things: family, work, politics. Their military communications are very standard. Orders, status reports, supply requests. Nothing unusual. Keth 9 nodded. This all sounded exactly like every other species he had observed. Show me their current military activities, Commander Lee activated a large display screen that filled one wall of the conference room. It showed a star map with several human settlements marked in blue. Red indicators showed areas of military conflict. There are currently 3 active war zones, Commander Lee explained. 2 involve disputes over mining rights on asteroid colonies. The third is a territorial conflict on a planet they call Kepler 438b. All very standard resource wars. How long have these conflicts been active? The asteroid disputes have been going on for 8 months. The planetary conflict started 6 months ago. Based on our models, the asteroid wars should end within another month when one side runs out of supplies. The planetary war will probably last another year. Keth-9 studied the display. Everything looked completely normal. The humans were fighting over valuable resources just like every other species did. Their technology was primitive, their tactics were predictable, and their wars followed standard patterns. I assume you have been recording their battles? Yes, Observer. We have complete records of 17 major engagements and 43 smaller conflicts. Would you like to review them now? Tomorrow will be sufficient. Tonight I would like to read your preliminary reports and familiarize myself with the station systems. Dr. Kim showed Keth-9 to his quarters, a comfortable room with a workstation and a large window overlooking the nearby star system. At the distance he could see the small yellow sun that the humans called Sol. The human homeworld is the 3rd planet orbiting that star, Dr. Kim said. They call it Earth. From what we can tell, it is a fairly typical world for their species type. Mostly water, moderate temperature, reasonable gravity. Have you identified what makes them expand so aggressively? Population pressure mostly. They reproduce quickly and seem to have a strong drive to explore new territories. Nothing we have not seen before. After Dr. Kim left, Keth-9 sat at his workstation and began reading through the team's reports from the past month. Everything confirmed his initial impression. The humans were a typical developing species with typical problems and typical solutions. Their wars were fought for typical reasons: territory, resources, political control. Their soldiers followed typical patterns. They advanced when they had advantages, retreated when they faced superior force, and generally tried to achieve their objectives with minimal losses. The only thing that seemed slightly unusual was their expansion rate, but even that could be explained by their high reproduction rate and the fact that they had discovered faster than light travel relatively early in their technological development. Keth-9 prepared his first report for the Bureau. Initial observations confirm that humans represent a standard Type 7 developing species, he wrote. Military capabilities are limited but improving. Expansion pattern is typical for their development level. No unusual behaviors observed. Recommend standard 6-month observation period. He sent the report and prepared for sleep. Tomorrow he would begin watching human battles in detail. Based on everything he had learned today, it would be routine work. He expected to understand their military patterns within a few weeks and complete his assignment without any surprises. Outside his window, the stars shone peacefully. In the distance, human ships moved between their colonies, carrying supplies and reinforcements to their various wars. Everything looked calm and predictable. Keth-9 had no way of knowing that within days, everything he thought he understood about warfare would be proven completely wrong. 3 weeks after arriving at Observation Post Sigma 7, Keth-9 experienced his first moment of genuine confusion about human behavior. He was watching a routine battle on the mining colony of Kepler 438b when something happened that made no sense according to everything he knew about warfare. The battle had been proceeding exactly as predicted. 2 human factions were fighting over control of a valuable mineral extraction facility. The attacking force had superior numbers and better equipment. The defenders were slowly being pushed back toward the main complex. Everything followed standard military patterns until Sergeant Hyun-woo Choi changed the rules. Keth-9 first noticed Sergeant Choi when the man's biological readings appeared on Dr. Kim's medical scanners. The readings were wrong. They had to be wrong. Dr. Kim, check your equipment, Keth-9 said, pointing at the display showing Sergeant Choi's vital signs. These readings cannot be accurate. Dr. Kim ran a diagnostic on her scanners and frowned. The equipment is functioning perfectly. Observer, those readings are correct. According to the medical data, Sergeant Choi had a broken left arm, 3 cracked ribs, and a piece of shrapnel embedded in his right leg. He had lost approximately 2 liters of blood from various wounds. His pain levels were beyond what any known species could endure while remaining conscious. Yet on the visual display, they could see Sergeant Choi not only awake and mobile, but actively fighting. He was carrying a wounded comrade toward a defensive position, while enemy fire struck the ground around them. "This is impossible," Commander Lee said, studying the tactical display. "Look at his movement patterns. He is not just conscious, he is thinking clearly and making good tactical decisions. No being should be able to function with those injuries." They watched in fascination as Sergeant Choi reached cover and began treating his wounded comrade's injuries. The medical scanners showed that Choi's own condition was deteriorating, but his actions remained steady and purposeful. "Perhaps humans have some kind of biological enhancement we have not detected," Technician Park suggested. "Pain suppressors, or healing accelerators." "I have scanned for all known medical technologies," Dr. Kim replied. "I detect no artificial enhancements, no chemical pain suppressors, no biological modifications. This human is operating on nothing but his natural biology." Over the next hour, they observed similar incidents across the battlefield. Corporal Suman Jang continued fighting with a concussion that should have left her unconscious. Private Daehyun Ko, who had lost his primary weapon when an explosion destroyed his position, was fashioning improvised explosives from medical supplies and spare equipment parts. "Show me Private Ko's current activity," Keth 9 requested. The display zoomed in on a section of the battlefield where Private Ko was working behind a pile of rubble. He had taken apart his military medical kit and was combining the antiseptic solution with heating elements from emergency food rations. "He is creating an improvised explosive device," Commander Lee observed. "The chemical combination will produce a small but effective blast if he can get close enough to an enemy vehicle." "Why would he risk his life for such a minimal tactical advantage?" Keth 9 asked. They watched as Private Ko carefully assembled his improvised weapon and began crawling toward an enemy position. He moved slowly and carefully, using every bit of available cover. The enemy vehicle he was targeting was a heavy weapons platform that had been preventing other human soldiers from reaching wounded comrades. "He is trading his life to save other soldiers," Dr. Kim said quietly. "The tactical advantage is minimal, but the human cost calculation is different from ours." Private Ko reached the enemy vehicle and placed his explosive device against its ammunition storage. The resulting explosion destroyed the vehicle and killed Private Ko instantly, but it also eliminated the heavy weapon that had been pinning down a squad of human soldiers, allowing them to evacuate 3 wounded comrades. 1 life for 3 lives, Commander Lee calculated. From a purely numerical standpoint, it is a reasonable trade. But most species would not make that trade voluntarily. The battle continued for several more hours, and each hour brought new examples of behavior that challenged their understanding of normal military conduct. When ammunition ran low, human soldiers fought with improvised weapons. When weapons broke, they used rocks and pieces of debris. When isolated from their units, they continued fighting alone rather than surrendering or retreating. The most disturbing incident occurred near the end of the battle. Corporal Jang, who had been fighting with a concussion for 6 hours, became trapped in a collapsed bunker when an enemy artillery strike brought down part of the structure. "She is completely cut off," Technician Park reported. "No communication with her unit, no possibility of rescue, and limited supplies." According to their sensors, Corporal Jang had enough water for perhaps 12 hours and no food. The bunker was surrounded by enemy forces. Any rational being would either surrender or simply wait quietly for capture. Instead, Corporal Jang began firing at enemy soldiers who approached her position. "Why is she continuing to fight?" Keth 9 asked. "She cannot escape, she cannot be rescued, and her resistance serves no tactical purpose." Technician Park monitored her radio transmissions for several hours before providing an answer. "She keeps repeating the same phrase. 'They will not pass. They will not pass.' I believe she thinks her position has strategic value. But it does not, Commander Lee protested. Even if the enemy takes that bunker, it will not change the outcome of the battle. The human does not seem to understand that, Technician Park replied. Corporal Zhang continued fighting from her trapped position for 18 hours. She fired at any enemy soldier who came within range, even though her ammunition was limited and her situation was hopeless. She maintained her vigil until she finally lost consciousness from dehydration and exhaustion. When the battle ended, the observation team spent hours reviewing the recordings and trying to understand what they had witnessed. By all standard military analysis, the defending humans should have surrendered 6 hours into the battle, Commander Lee said during their debriefing session. They were outnumbered, outgunned, and cut off from reinforcements. Continuing to fight served no logical purpose. Yet they not only continued fighting, they fought more effectively as their situation became more desperate, Dr. Kim added. Sergeant Choi performed better after he was wounded than before. Private Ko showed tactical creativity when his equipment was destroyed. Corporal Zhang held a meaningless position as if it were the most important place in the galaxy. Keth 9 studied the casualty reports and tactical summaries. The numbers told a story that made no sense according to conventional military theory. The defending force lost the battle, he said slowly, but they inflicted casualties far beyond what their numbers and equipment should have allowed. The attackers achieved their objective, but at such a high cost that their next planned offensive has been delayed by several months. How do you explain soldiers fighting more effectively when they are wounded? Dr. Kim asked. How do you account for tactical decisions that prioritize saving comrades over personal survival? How do you analyze military behavior that seems to operate according to completely different rules than we understand? I do not know, Keth 9 admitted, but I know we need to observe more battles before we can form any conclusions. That night, Keth 9 attempted to write his weekly report to the Bureau. But every time he tried to describe what he had observed, the words seemed inadequate. How do you explain to a logical species that humans appear to fight harder when they are losing? How do you describe military behavior that seems to be motivated by something other than survival or tactical advantage? Computer delete previous entry, Keth 9 said for the 4th time. Begin new report. He finally settled on a simple summary. Human military behavior shows significant deviations from predicted patterns. Individual sacrifice rates are higher than normal. Combat effectiveness appears to increase under adverse conditions. Recommend continued observation to determine if these behaviors are consistent or anomalous. As he submitted the report, Keth 9 realized that his neat categories for understanding warfare were already beginning to break down. After 3 weeks of observation, he was more confused about humanity than when he had started. Outside his window, the stars shone peacefully over the human colony worlds. But now when Keth 9 looked at those distant points of light, he no longer saw predictable military targets. He saw something that might be far more dangerous than anyone in the galaxy realized, something that fought according to rules no one else understood. The next morning brought news of 3 new human conflicts beginning across their territory. Keth 9 found himself looking forward to observing them, not because he expected to confirm his existing theories, but because he hoped they might help him understand what he was really watching. He had a growing suspicion that humanity was about to teach the galaxy something entirely new about the nature of warfare itself. 1 month after beginning his observation of human warfare, Keth 9 found himself standing in the observation center at 3 in the morning, unable to sleep. On the main screen, the Battle of Titan Station was entering its 15th day. According to every military model he knew, it should have ended 2 weeks ago. You cannot sleep either? Dr. Kim asked, entering the center with a cup of hot tea. I keep thinking about the numbers, Keth 9 replied. 3,000 human defenders against 15,000 attackers. They should have surrendered on the first day. Dr. Kim joined him at the observation window. Below them, Titan Station was a bright point of light in the darkness of space. Even from their distance, they could see the flashes of weapons fire and explosions. I have been monitoring the biological signs of the defenders, Dr. Kim said. Most of them have not slept more than 2 hours at a time in the past week. They are suffering from exhaustion, hunger, and stress levels that should have broken their ability to function. Yet they continue fighting. Technician Park's voice came over the communication system. Observer Keth 9, I am receiving a transmission from the station commander. Would you like me to translate it? Yes. Put it on the main speakers. The voice that filled the observation center was tired but steady. It belonged to Lieutenant Colonel Yoonji Nam, the human officer in charge of defending Titan Station. Earth Command, this is Titan Station. We have held for 14 days against overwhelming odds. Our ammunition is running low. Our food supplies are nearly gone, medical supplies are exhausted. But we will continue to hold this position until relieved or until the last of us falls. Tell our families we remembered our duty. Tell them we did not run. Titan Station out. The transmission ended, leaving the observation center in silence. Why? Commander Lee asked, entering the center. She looked as tired as the rest of them. None of them had been sleeping well since the battle began. Why do they continue fighting when they know they cannot win? I have been studying their tactical situation, Keth 9 said, pulling up the battle display. Titan Station has no strategic value. It is a refueling depot for mining ships. Even if the defenders hold it, they cannot change the outcome of the larger war. Then why sacrifice 3,000 lives for it? Dr. Kim asked. They watched the battle continue throughout the night. The human defenders had divided their remaining forces into small groups, each holding a different section of the station. When one group was overwhelmed, the survivors would fall back to join another group. They fought for every corridor, every room, every ventilation shaft. At dawn, they witnessed something that would haunt Keth 9 for the rest of his life. Captain Jiho-sun, leading a group of 12 human soldiers, volunteered to repair a critical breach in the station's outer hull. The repair required someone to work in the vacuum of space for at least 3 minutes. The emergency suits on the station only have 2 minutes of air supply, Dr. Kim reported, reading her scanners. He knows this repair will kill him. They watched as Captain Sun put on the damaged emergency suit and stepped through the airlock. The other soldiers sealed the door behind him. Through their sensors, they could see him working frantically to patch the hull breach while his suit's air supply ran out. Captain Sun completed the repair with his last breath. His sacrifice bought the station another 6 hours of life. I do not understand, Commander Lee said quietly. What drives them to do these things? Over the following days, they witnessed act after act of impossible courage. Sergeant Myong Ko, wounded and bleeding, crawled through damaged ventilation shafts to carry ammunition to isolated defenders. Private Hana Lee stayed at her communication post for 36 straight hours, coordinating the defense while the command center crumbled around her. When the station's water recycling system failed, engineer Woo Jin Seo spent his last 4 hours of life repairing it so that his comrades could survive a few hours longer. When the medical bay was destroyed, Dr. Ji-young-oh continued treating wounded soldiers in a storage closet with supplies salvaged from the wreckage. They are transforming death into purpose, Dr. Kim observed during one of their analysis sessions. Each time someone dies, they accomplish something that helps the others continue fighting. But for what end? Keth 9 asked. They cannot win. They will all die eventually. Maybe that is not the point, Technician Park said quietly. I have been listening to their private communications. They do not talk about winning. They talk about duty, about honor, about not letting their friends down. Those are abstract concepts, Commander Lee protested. No rational being dies for abstract concepts. Are you sure about that? Dr. Kim asked. We have been watching them do exactly that for 17 days. On the 18th day, Titan Station finally fell. Of the 3,000 original defenders, only 12 remained alive when the attackers finally broke through the last defensive position. All 12 were unconscious from blood loss and exhaustion. The attacking force had won, but at a terrible cost. They had lost over 8,000 soldiers, taking a station that 12 humans continued defending until they literally could not stand. That night, Keth 9 sat alone in his quarters, staring at the casualty reports. The numbers made no sense from any logical perspective. The humans had lost, but they had made victory so expensive that their enemies would need months to recover. Observer Keth 9. Dr. Kim's voice came through the communication system. Could you come to the observation center? We are receiving something unusual. Keth 9 found his team gathered around the main display screen. On it was a message from Earth, broadcast on all human communication frequencies. Citizens of humanity, the message began. Today we mourn the brave defenders of Titan Station. For 18 days, 3,000 of our brothers and sisters held their position against impossible odds. They knew they could not win. They knew rescue was not coming. Yet they chose to stand and fight rather than surrender or flee. The message continued. Let their sacrifice remind us that some things are more important than life itself. Let their courage inspire us to be worthy of the freedom they died defending. The defenders of Titan Station have become legend. Their names will be remembered forever. The message ended with a list. 3,000 names read slowly and clearly. Every single human who had died defending the station was named and honored. They are turning their defeat into a victory, Commander Lee said in wonder. Somehow they are making the loss of Titan Station into something that makes their species stronger. Keth 9 realized that his hands were shaking. In 40 years of observing warfare, he had never seen anything like this. Most species tried to forget their defeats. Humans were transforming their defeats into inspiration for future battles. I need to revise my reports, he said. Everything I thought I understood about human military behavior is wrong. That night, Keth 9 tried to write his monthly report to the Bureau, but every time he started to type, he found himself thinking about Captain Sun working in the vacuum of space, or Lieutenant Colonel Nam's final transmission, or the 12 defenders who fought until they lost consciousness. How do you explain to a rational species that humans fight harder when they know they will lose? How do you describe the tactical advantage of willing self-sacrifice to beings who have never experienced anything like it? For the first time in his career, Keth 9 found himself unable to complete a report. The human way of war could not be explained using the standard categories and measurements that worked for every other species. He was beginning to realize that understanding humanity would require him to abandon everything he thought he knew about the nature of warfare itself. 2 months into his assignment, Keth 9 discovered something that disturbed him more than all the impossible battles he had witnessed. He was starting to care about individual humans, not as research subjects, but as beings whose survival mattered to him personally. It began when he found himself learning the names of human soldiers instead of just tracking them by identification numbers. Sergeant Hee-Sung Yoon, who had held Hill 247 for 6 days with only 11 other soldiers. Lieutenant Soo-Young Kang, who had volunteered for 17 dangerous missions and somehow survived them all. Private Jamin Bae, barely old enough for military service, who had saved his entire unit by throwing himself on an explosive device. Observer, you have been reviewing that same battle footage for 3 hours, Dr. Kim said, entering the observation center where Keth 9 sat alone. I am trying to understand Lieutenant Kang's decision-making process, Keth 9 replied, though he knew that was not entirely true. He was actually worried about whether Lieutenant Kang had survived her latest mission. Her mission ended 6 hours ago. She is safe at the base camp, Dr. Kim said gently. Keth 9 looked up, startled. He had not realized his concern was so obvious. Thank you for the information, Doctor. Dr. Kim sat down beside him. Observer, I need to confess something. I have been tracking individual humans as well. Not for research purposes, but because I find myself concerned about their welfare. That is inappropriate attachment to research subjects, Keth 9 said, though he felt relieved that he was not the only one experiencing these feelings. I know, but I cannot help it. When Sergeant Yoon was wounded last week, I found myself hoping he would recover. When Private Bae died saving his unit, I felt something I can only describe as grief. They sat in silence for a moment, both acknowledging feelings they were not supposed to have. Commander Lee has been affected as well, Dr. Kim continued. She has started calculating human casualty rates not as statistical data, but as personal losses. Yesterday she told me she had to stop watching when Corporal Inai Park was killed. She said it was too painful. And Technician Park? He has been learning human names and personal histories from their communications. He knows which soldiers have families, which ones are homesick, which ones write letters they will never send. He told me yesterday that listening to their private conversations is becoming emotionally overwhelming. Keth 9 realized that his entire team was experiencing the same transformation. They had begun this assignment as detached observers studying an alien species. Somehow they had become emotionally invested witnesses to individual human lives. "Why is this happening to us?" Keth 9 asked. "I think it is because of how humans fight," Dr. Kim replied. "They do not just wage war. They sacrifice themselves for each other in ways that make their individual lives matter. When you watch someone willingly die to save their friends, it becomes impossible to see them as just a research subject." That evening, they witnessed the beginning of the siege of New Seoul, a human colony that had been surrounded by enemy forces. The defenders were outnumbered 4-1, with limited supplies and no hope of reinforcement. Based on standard projections, the siege should last no more than 10 days, Commander Lee reported, though her voice lacked its usual professional confidence. "How many defenders?" Keth 9 asked. 800 humans under the command of Major Taehyun Lim. Keth 9 found himself hoping that Major Lim was a competent commander who would minimize casualties among his soldiers. The fact that he was hoping for anything at all troubled him deeply. Over the following days, they watched the siege develop. The human defenders established a careful rotation system, ensuring that soldiers could rest while others maintained the defensive perimeters. They rationed their food and water with mathematical precision. They treated their wounded with improvised medical supplies. "They are managing their resources very efficiently," Dr. Kim observed. "Much more efficiently than most species under similar pressure. Look at their communication patterns," Technician Park added. Part 1, The Assignment Observer. Keth 9 stood in the transport bay of the research vessel Eternal Dawn, watching the stars shift through the viewport. His reflection stared back at him, tall, pale, with the silver markings along his temples that showed his rank in the Galactic Intelligence Bureau. Today would begin what his supervisors called a routine assignment. He did not expect it to change his life. The transport shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the clear metal windows, Keth 9 could see their destination, Observation Post Sigma 7. The station looked like a small moon, its surface covered in sensor arrays and communication dishes. It was completely invisible to the primitive, scanning technology of the species they would be watching. "First time observing a new species, Observer Keth 9? Asked the transport pilot, a friendly Velkin named Captain Riso. "No, Captain. I have observed 17 different species over the past 40 years. This assignment should be no different from the others." Captain Riso smiled. "These humans are supposed to be quite interesting. My cousin works in the Initial Contact Division. He says they have some unusual behaviors." Keth 9 nodded politely but felt no particular curiosity. In his experience, all newly discovered species seemed unusual until you understood their basic nature. Most followed predictable patterns. They fought over resources, expanded their territory when they could, and generally acted according to simple survival instincts. The transport docked with Observation Post Sigma 7 20 minutes later. Keth 9 gathered his personal belongings and walked through the airlock into the station. The first person to greet him was Dr. Yuna Kim, the xenobiologist assigned to his team. "Welcome to Sigma 7, Observer Keth 9, she said, bowing slightly in the traditional Velkin greeting. "I hope your journey was comfortable." Dr. Kim was younger than Keth 9 expected, probably only 15 years out of the academy. Her dark hair was pulled back in a practical style, and her eyes showed the bright curiosity that marked most scientists. She wore the blue uniform of the research division. "Thank you, Doctor. I am eager to begin our work. What have you learned about these humans so far?" "They are quite fascinating," Dr. Kim replied as she led him through the station corridors. "They have only achieved faster-than-light travel in the past 50 years. Yet they have already established colonies on 12 different worlds. Their expansion rate is much faster than we predicted. They walked past laboratories filled with monitoring equipment. Through the windows, Keth 9 could see dozens of screens showing various human settlements and ships. Everything looked very ordinary. Their technology level? Keth 9 asked. Primitive by our standards, but advancing quickly. They seem to learn and adapt faster than most species at their development stage. However, they still wage war in very traditional ways. They reached a conference room where 2 other team members waited. Commander Ji-won Lee stood at attention when they entered. She was obviously military, with the straight posture and alert eyes that marked career soldiers. Her uniform was the dark green of the Strategic Analysis Corps. Observer Keth 9, Commander Lee said formally. I am honored to work with someone of your experience. The honor is mine, Commander. What is your assessment of human military capabilities? Surprisingly limited, Commander Lee replied. Their weapons are chemical-based projectiles and simple energy systems. Their ships are slow and poorly armored. Their tactics are straightforward and predictable. Honestly, I am not sure why the Bureau considers them worth studying. The third team member was Technician Minho Park, a communications specialist. He was quiet and serious, with the careful manner of someone who spent most of his time listening to other people's conversations. Technician Park has been monitoring human communications for the past month, Dr. Kim explained. What have you learned about their language and culture? They use over 6,000 different languages, Technician Park said in his soft voice. However, they have developed several common languages for trade and military purposes. Their communications are not encrypted in any meaningful way. We can understand almost everything they say. What do they talk about? Keth 9 asked. The usual things. Family, work, politics. Their military communications are very standard. Orders, status reports, supply requests, nothing unusual. Keth 9 nodded. This all sounded exactly like every other species he had observed. Show me their current military activities. Commander Lee activated a large display screen that filled one wall of the conference room. It showed a star map, with several human settlements marked in blue. Red indicators showed areas of military conflict. There are currently 3 active war zones, Commander Lee explained. 2 involve disputes over mining rights on asteroid colonies. The third is a territorial conflict on a planet they call Kepler 438b. All very standard resource wars. How long have these conflicts been active? The asteroid disputes have been going on for 8 months. The planetary conflict started 6 months ago. Based on our models, the asteroid wars should end within another month when one side runs out of supplies. The planetary war will probably last another year. Keth 9 studied the display. Everything looked completely normal. The humans were fighting over valuable resources. 3 months into his observation of humanity, Keth 9 had stopped sleeping through the night. He would wake up at odd hours and find himself reviewing battle footage, not for research purposes, but because he could not stop thinking about the humans he had watched die. Observer, you look terrible, Dr. Kim said during their morning briefing. When was the last time you slept for more than 3 hours? I do not know. Keth 9 replied honestly. Every time I close my eyes, I see Private Bay throwing himself on that explosive device. Or Captain Sun working in vacuum until his air ran out. Or Corporal Park holding her position until she collapsed from blood loss. You are experiencing what humans call trauma, Dr. Kim said gently. The prolonged observation of violence and sacrifice is affecting your mental health, but humans experience this same trauma, and they continue fighting. How do they do it? Before Dr. Kim could answer, Commander Lee entered the briefing room with an urgent expression. Observer, we have a new situation developing. The Battle of Proxima Ridge has begun, and initial readings suggest it will be unlike anything we have observed before. On the main display screen, they could see a human defensive position on a mountainous world called Proxima Centauri b. The defenders consisted of a single company of 150 soldiers led by Captain Gunho Park. They were facing an assault force of over 2,000 enemy troops. "The tactical situation is hopeless," Commander Lee reported. "The humans have no air support, limited ammunition, and no possibility of reinforcement. They should surrender immediately." "Have they received surrender demands?" Keth 9 asked. 3 times in the past hour. Captain Park has refused each time. They watched as the battle developed. The human defensive position was well chosen, taking advantage of the mountainous terrain to create choke points and fields of fire. But even the best position could not overcome such overwhelming numerical disadvantage. Within 4 hours, half the human defenders were dead or wounded. Within 8 hours, only 30 soldiers remained effective. By the end of the first day, Captain Park had 17 soldiers left under his command. "Why do they not surrender?" Dr. Kim asked. "They have proven their courage. No one would consider it shameful to surrender now." "I have been monitoring their communications," Technician Park reported. "They are not fighting to win. They are fighting to buy time." "Time for what?" "Evacuation ships are removing civilian populations from 3 nearby colonies. Every hour the soldiers hold Proxima Ridge is another hour for civilians to escape." Keth 9 studied the tactical display. "How many civilians?" "Approximately 50,000 people, including 15,000 children." The mathematics were simple and terrible. 17 soldiers were fighting to protect 50,000 civilians they would never meet. Each soldier who died bought evacuation, time for thousands of people they had never seen. By the second day, Captain Park had only 8 soldiers left. By the third day, there were 4. On the 4th day, Private First Class Sunmi Han found herself alone. "She is the sole survivor," Dr. Kim reported, her voice barely above a whisper. "Everyone else is dead." They watched through their sensors as Private Han continued fighting from her position among the rocks and debris. She had been wounded multiple times. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted. She had no communication with command, no knowledge of whether the civilian evacuation was complete, and no hope of survival. "She should run," Commander Lee said. "There is no shame in retreat when you are the last one left." But Private Han did not run. She continued firing at the advancing enemy forces, moving from position to position among the wreckage of her unit's defensive line. When her rifle ran out of ammunition, she used a sidearm. When that was empty, she threw rocks. For 8 hours, one wounded human soldier held a strategic mountain pass against overwhelming odds. She held it not because she could win, but because someone had to. She held it because her orders were to defend the position, and no one had told her to stop. Technician Park translated her final transmission, spoken to herself in the empty defensive position. "Someone has to hold the line. Someone has to." Private Han died fighting with her bare hands against soldiers armed with advanced weapons. She held Proxima Ridge for 8 hours and 23 minutes longer than any military analyst thought possible. The civilian evacuation was completed 6 hours ago, Technician Park reported quietly. She saved them all. That night, Keth 9 sat in his quarters staring at the casualty report from Proxima Ridge. 150 human soldiers had died to save 50,000 civilians. The mathematics should have made it a reasonable trade. But knowing the individuals involved made it feel like something else entirely. He thought about Captain Park's final order to his troops. "We hold until relieved, or until the last of us falls." He thought about Private Han, alone among the bodies of her comrades still fighting because someone had to. He thought about the 50,000 civilians who would live because 150 soldiers had chosen to die. "Dr. Kim," he called, over the communication system. "I need to understand something." When Dr. Kim arrived, she found Keth 9 reviewing Private Han's biological readings from her final hours. "Look at this," he said, pointing to the medical display. Her stress hormones should have caused system shutdown hours before she died. Her pain levels were beyond what any known species can endure. Her blood loss should have caused unconsciousness. "I see that." But she kept fighting. Not just kept fighting, but fought effectively. She held strategic positions, conserved ammunition, and used tactics that required clear thinking. How is this possible? Dr. Kim studied the readings. I think it has to do with what you identified earlier. Love as a weapon. Explain. Private Han was not fighting for herself. She was fighting for 50,000 people she had never met. Her love for those abstract strangers gave her strength beyond her biological limits. Her body should have failed, but her purpose kept her going. You mean she literally transformed caring into physical capability? That is exactly what I mean. Humans do not just fight despite their limitations. They transcend their limitations through emotional connection to something larger than themselves. Keth 9 thought about this as he reviewed the recordings of Private Han's final hours. She had not been thinking about her own survival. She had been thinking about families evacuating their homes, children being carried to safety, people she would never meet living because she chose to die. This is why observing them affects us so deeply, he realized. When we watch humans fight, we are watching love become stronger than death. We are witnessing the transformation of emotion into impossible physical achievement, and that transformation changes the observers as well as the observed, Dr. Kim agreed. Keth 9 finally understood why sleep had become so difficult. He was not just processing data about an alien species. He was witnessing daily acts of love, so profound that they redefined what he thought was possible for sentient beings to achieve. I need to revise everything in my reports, he said. Human military capability is not based on technology or tactics. It is based on their ability to love something more than they love their own lives. That night, for the first time in weeks, Keth 9 slept deeply. But his dreams were filled with images of Private Han, alone on Proxima Ridge fighting for people she would never meet because someone had to hold the line. 4 months after beginning his observation of humanity, Keth 9 sat down to write his final report. His desk was covered with recordings, biological data, tactical analyses, and personal notes that had accumulated during the longest and most disturbing assignment of his career. Outside his window, human ships continued moving between their colonies carrying supplies and reinforcements to distant wars. But now when Keth 9 looked at those ships, he did not see primitive vessels carrying a developing species. He saw something that would fundamentally change how the galaxy understood warfare itself. Computer, begin new document. Classification, maximum security. Subject, final analysis of human military behavior. He began typing, but found that the standard format for military assessment reports was completely inadequate for what he needed to communicate. Computer, delete previous entry. Begin new document. Classification, maximum security. Subject, the weaponization of mortality, a complete reassessment of human military capability. Keth 9 wrote steadily for 6 hours, occasionally pausing to review recordings or check data, but mostly letting his thoughts flow directly onto the screen. When he finished, he had produced a document unlike any intelligence report in galactic history. The report began with a simple statement. Everything we thought we knew about warfare has been proven wrong by humanity. He documented the battles he had observed, but not in the traditional format of tactical analysis and casualty statistics. Instead, he told the stories of individuals like Sergeant Choi, who fought beyond the point where pain should have rendered him unconscious. Like Private Han, who held a position alone for 8 hours because someone had to. Like Captain Sun, who died in vacuum to save his comrades. Human military effectiveness cannot be measured using standard metrics, he wrote. Their strength comes not from technology or numbers but from their transformation of mortality into meaning. They fight harder when they have more to lose because loss gives their sacrifice value. He included detailed biological data showing how humans consistently performed beyond their physical limits when fighting for causes they believed in. He documented their refusal to surrender when logic dictated they should, and their ability to turn defeat into inspiration for future victories. Humans have weaponized the very thing that should make them weakest, their knowledge that they will die. This awareness of mortality, rather than paralyzing them, drives them to acts of courage that transcend individual capability. The most difficult section to write was his analysis of how observing humanity had affected his team. Prolonged observation of human warfare produces emotional attachment in observers, he wrote. This is not a failure of scientific objectivity, but an inevitable result of witnessing love transform into physical courage. To understand human military behavior, one must experience the emotional cost of watching beings willingly sacrifice everything for abstract principles. He documented his team's sleep disturbances, their growing attachment to individual human soldiers, and their difficulty maintaining clinical detachment when watching people die for causes larger than themselves. The psychological weapon humans wield unconsciously is their ability to make their mortality meaningful. Every human battle is fought by beings who understand that life is finite, which gives weight to their choices in ways that immortal or extremely long-lived species cannot comprehend. The report's conclusions were radical enough to reshape galactic military doctrine. Recommendation 1. Traditional military analysis is inadequate for assessing human capabilities. Standard assumptions about surrender, retreat, and casualty, tolerance do not apply to human forces. Recommendation 2. Human military strength increases rather than decreases under adverse conditions. They fight most effectively when defending causes they value more than their own survival. Recommendation 3. Any conflict with humanity must account for their willingness to accept casualties that would break the will of other species. They view death in battle not as failure, but as the ultimate expression of commitment to their cause. Recommendation 4. The emotional cost of observing human warfare should be considered when assigning personnel to monitoring duties. Prolonged exposure to human military behavior produces psychological effects that may be permanent. The final section of the report was personal, in a way that violated every protocol for intelligence documents. Observer's note. I have spent 4 months watching humans transform limitation into strength, mortality into meaning, and love into victory. I have seen soldiers die for people they never met, defend positions they could not hope to hold, and fight battles they could not win. I have watched them turn every disadvantage into an opportunity to prove that something matters more than survival. This assignment has changed me. I no longer sleep easily because I cannot stop thinking about the humans who have died fighting for causes they believed in. I find myself caring about the survival of individual soldiers in ways that interfere with my objectivity. I experience emotions my species evolved beyond centuries ago. I believe this change is not a failure of my professional detachment, but an inevitable result of witnessing what humans achieve through the weaponization of care itself. They fight with love, and love is contagious even across species barriers. The galaxy has never encountered a species like humanity. We have observed beings who are technologically advanced, strategically brilliant, or numerically superior. But we have never observed beings who consistently transform weakness into strength through the simple act of caring about something more than themselves. Humanity represents a fundamental challenge to our understanding of warfare, courage, and the relationship between mortality and meaning. They have taken the universal limitation of finite existence and transformed it into their greatest tactical advantage. Any species that underestimates humanity because of their primitive technology or individual physical limitations does so at their own peril. They are not dangerous because of what they can do, but because of what they are willing to sacrifice. And they are willing to sacrifice everything. Keth-9 read through the report 3 times before submitting it. He knew it would be classified at the highest levels and used to develop new protocols for dealing with species that demonstrated what the report termed mortality-enhanced combat effectiveness. As he transmitted the document to the Galactic Intelligence Bureau, Keth-9 realized that his assignment was complete, but his understanding of humanity would continue evolving for the rest of his life. 2 days later, he received new orders. He was being reassigned to peaceful observation duties monitoring a species of highly advanced but completely pacifist beings who had not fought a war in over 1,000 years. The assignment was clearly intended to help him recover from the psychological stress of watching human warfare. But as Keth-9 prepared to leave Observation Post Sigma-7, he realized that no future assignment would ever seem significant after witnessing humanity transform death into victory on a daily basis. His final log entry before departure read, I came here to observe an alien species at war. I leave understanding that I have witnessed something far more profound. The transformation of mortality into transcendence. Humanity has taught me that the greatest strength comes not from avoiding death, but from choosing what to die for. I will never sleep peacefully again. But I will also never doubt that some things are worth more than survival itself. The observation post continued monitoring human military activities, but now with a different understanding. The new team assigned to replace Keth-9 received special psychological preparation and were rotated frequently to prevent the emotional attachment that had affected their predecessors. The galaxy began developing new military doctrines based on Keth-9's report, but most species remained skeptical that any beings could really be as formidable as the document suggested. They would learn otherwise when they encountered humanity directly. But by then, it would be too late to avoid the consequences of underestimating a species that had learned to fight as if their lives had meaning, precisely because those lives would end. Part 1. The Assignment Observer. Keth-9 stood in the transport bay of the research vessel Eternal Dawn, watching the stars shift through the viewport. His reflection stared back at him, tall, pale, with the silver markings along his temples that showed his rank in the Galactic Intelligence Bureau. Today would begin what his supervisors called a routine assignment. He did not expect it to change his life. The transport shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace. Through the clear metal windows, Keth-9 could see their destination. Observation. Host Sigma 7. The station looked like a small moon, its surface covered in sensor arrays and communication dishes. It was completely invisible to the primitive scanning technology of the species they would be watching. First time observing a new species, Observer Keth-9? Asked the transport pilot, a friendly Velkin named Captain Rizzo. No, Captain. I have observed 17 different species over the past 40 years. This assignment should be no different from the others. Captain Rizzo smiled. These humans are supposed to be quite interesting. My cousin works in the Initial Contact Division. He says they have some unusual behaviors, Keth. 9 nodded politely but felt no particular curiosity.